All right, hello and welcome to My Matters. My name's Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and today we have a very special episode. We're going to be talking about asking for help and therapy, but we also have a very special guest, Jason. So, Jason, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name's Jason Marotzke. I've been in the counseling field since 2005. Started off as a school counselor, worked in counseling education, which means I was part of the programs that trained up and coming counselors, both school and clinical mental health counselors, and have been involved in counseling leadership at the state, regional, and national level, where I just served a board position on the ACA Governing Council, the American Counseling Association Governing
Yeah,
Council.
that's awesome. And we're so lucky to have you today because all of our previous episodes have been about, mental health topics, but we haven't been able to talk to an actual mental health professional and get a glimpse of what it's like to work in the field. So we're very lucky to have you, and hopefully this will be, a good and enlightening episode. So at the beginning of each episode, we kind of read a mission statement to kind of let people know what we intend to accomplish with this episode. So depression, anxiety, or that uneasy, empty, or lonely feeling inside of you is very common and normal amongst high schoolers, but it is not talked about. The goal of this show is to make you feel like your experiences are normal and recognized. We will also give you practical solutions to improve your life. Mind Matters is the only podcast that talks about those ugly feelings from a high school perspective.
Well said, Ben. So, we usually start off every episode by kind of defining our terms and going over what we think the topic of discussion means. So, in terms of asking for help in therapy, I think one word that kind of pops to mind is stigma. And I think, in terms of my definition, stigma is kind of hard to recognize at times, but it's this idea that is kind of commonly held amongst high schoolers and many adults as well, that asking for help, going to therapy is a sign of weakness, and that you're inferior in a sense if you need to do that and you can't handle your own problems. So I think that's what I think stigma means when it comes to therapy.
Yeah, stigma for me, and I've experienced this throughout my entire life. I've experienced a lot of like a lot of worry about going to therapists, to be honest. I've been to a lot of therapists and I've been not necessarily so enthusiastic about going, but has helped me. Not to offend you, Jason, to going to
No
therapists,
offense.
but yeah, and I think stigma for me is, a pattern of people having fear about doing something because of society's perception of it. And I think in all honesty, society's perception of therapy is not all positive, and I think that definitely affects people who might be considering going. Kabir?
Great definitions, guys. For me, when it comes to therapy, stigma um, revolves around negative thinking patterns on certain mental health topics, or even on mental health in general, right? There's this idea in society that you need to be resilient or you need to deal with your problems by yourself, or else as Ethan was saying, you're weak. But I mean, we wouldn't really consider that true for like a physical injury, like breaking a leg or something, because obviously there are certain protocols that are done to make sure that the patient is feeling better, right? There are certain patterns and medicines and techniques, but in the mental health space that applies as well. And I think stigma is kind of this disconnect between what we recognize as being acceptable in a physical sense and in a mental sense.
Hmm.
All great, great definitions. And, stigma can also be a perceived stigma, where we think that there's going to be more backlash or more negativity than sometimes there is. And I know, depending on where you're at in your life and within your own self, identifying who you are, sometimes that might be a lot to try to overcome. And sometimes it can be, you might not even give it a second thought. Our family of origin also brings stigma in. So if you look at different generations on, the older generations like suck it up, you'll get over it. Just, next month you'll feel better. All of these things can build that idea of there are barriers to go seeking help. And that's what a lot of times you have to overcome when we talk about stigma is how do you break free from it, right? How do you lessen its hold on your ability to take care of yourself?
Yeah, that's such a great point, and it leads into the next question because what I hear you saying, right, is that your self-perceived stigma that you're going to be a victim of could actually, before you go to therapy, make the stress or depression or anxiety you're feeling even worse. So, I mean, it goes, you're at a level of anxiety, and then it gets better, and then it gets worse, and then as you go to therapy, ideally, it would get better. So, it's a perfect way that you describe it, that it's a hump you have to get
Mhm.
over. So that kind of leads into the next question, and you kind of already covered it, is how does the stigma around therapy affect people who might be considering getting help?
It becomes a huge barrier, for
Yeah.
some. They don't want to admit that they're struggling with something, right? They don't want to make it well known, that they're struggling with something when what they really need is that assistance. They need to, rally their tribe of family and friends around them to try to help them become better and stronger. And so how do we start to get over that is by taking those little steps. Like what you guys are doing here is huge for breaking stigma, right? Is it's talking about um, what's going on, how you address it, from a personal perspective. And when we bring that out to the, into the light, when we start to have these genuine, open conversations, it starts to loosen the hold of that stigma on an individual that needs to go in for assistance or needs to go in for help.
hmm Yeah, and I pulled up some interesting statistics when it comes to stigma just to kind of show this a little bit more. According to Harvard Medicine, half of the people who are alive in this world will experience a mental health disorder in their lifetime. However, only half of them will end up receiving some type of mental health treatment. So I think that kind of just goes to show that there definitely is some a hesitation when it comes to just taking that first step, whether it be, talking to someone about something you're struggling with or, jumping right to therapy, whatever it is. But I think definitely what we're trying to emphasize is that when you ask for help, it doesn't always mean therapy, but just asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Vulnerability, in my opinion, I think is a sign of strength. It shows that you want to take care of yourself. You want to take care of your loved ones by creating the best version of yourself. So I think definitely in our society, however hard it may be, we definitely need to work on changing that definition for sure.
Absolutely. And I think another big issue when it comes to therapy, as represented by, people in society, is that you need to have some kind of extreme mental health problem in order to get help. And I think that idea kind of connects to the idea of like physical health, right? Because people will often associate a severe mental condition with some kind of physical deterioration, when in reality, you don't need to have those like severe mental issues in order to reach out. It's merely a matter of checking in and get, even if it's not as significant as like a major disorder. Those little steps towards increasing your mental health are extremely important, and they can be resolved with therapy.
Absolutely. And I want to use an analogy that my wife Joyce Martyr uses and started using in some of her presentations. It's, have you gone to a dentist? And how often do you go to dentists? You do, maintenance checkups, right? You do your cleanings and you do everything. And let's say they find, that you need a root canal. Are you going to ignore the root canal? Are you not going to do the root canal? And then you do go in for the root canal and like, well, this is going to be painful, so we're going to use Novocaine and meds. And you're like, no, I don't believe in meds. They're not gonna help me at all. I'm just gonna bear it. Let's go ahead and do it. It's the same thing with mental health issues. You want to go in for maintenance, like you just said, you don't need to have a major problem. You can go in for just establishing yourself with a clinical mental health, facilitator that can help you develop skills so you maybe not reach the point where you're going to have a huge trauma or breakdown or in crisis. And so there's a lot of ways to look at it in a preventative manner.
Yeah, definitely. And I love how you talked about, that really one of the main goals of this podcast is to break the stigma, right? That's the
Mhm.
best thing we can do because we're not therapists, right? We can give people tips from a high school perspective, but there's no way we'd give as good as tips as you or, help people as well as you do. But yeah, I like that you bring that up. And I also wanted to ask because a lot of people feel this and have this worry. Um, I think many individuals, resist therapy because they fear being judged by people, but also by, their therapist. So I want to hear, from the horse's mouth, do therapists or counselors judge their patients?
Absolutely not. No,
Yeah,
the training that therapists go through is the core of therapy is to create uh, a warm therapeutic environment, which
right.
means it's a judge-free environment, right? And so therapists here, I guarantee you, therapists have heard a lot of stuff, that is major, major things that individuals have gone through. And there's not going to be judgment on it. Negative judgment. They might be like, they in their head might be thinking, okay, so this person might need these services, they might need this, they might need that, but they're not looking at connecting you with what you're saying as far as like that doesn't become you, right? That's something that you're going
Exactly.
through. It's not who you are. And so they look at who you are and to help you through those steps.
Yeah, and obviously is also, what you say in a meeting with a therapist or a counselor is 100% completely confidential.
Mm.
Obviously, unless you're, going to hurt somebody or yourself.
Correct. I was gonna say it's not 100%.
Yeah.
And there's some stipulations to that. One
Yeah.
is that harm to self or others,
Yeah, 100%.
is a big one where they may have to break confidentiality.
Right.
Um, since your podcast is geared towards adolescents, minors, I
Mhm.
do have to also say though that within a counseling environment, parents do have the ability to request records, the notes and things like that that might be going on in therapy. Counseling notes don't have word for word detail of everything that's said, right? So it has like generalizations, it has, some diagnoses, but potentially that's been discussed with you. It also has some goals, that you have already talked about in your sessions. So it's the notes don't contain a ton of information that specific information that you've been talked to. Um, Now I know your podcast is national, so it depends on state to state, some of the different laws. But in Illinois, you can see a therapist. I believe it's for maybe 6 sessions before they have to notify your parents. Um, so there is some leeway in that as well. But they're typically like the therapist that I know and the way I do training is that, having that conversation with the parents up front too, saying that this works really well. If we have confidentiality, trust me, if something really bad is going on, I will come to you and let you know. Otherwise, this work will be done with, the client who's the student, or the adolescent and myself. Unless something major comes in, then we'll bring you in. And then typically working with you, the client, to be able to have that conversation with your parents or guardian.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's good that you bring that up because it, kind of leads into the next section about, the rules and regulations of therapy and different things that go on and financial concerns and all that because we want to spread, the messages about that. But before we go into that, I just want to, emphasize something that I try and emphasize a lot about stigma. A lot, or maybe even most of people who go to therapy are in therapy because of, anxiety, depression, but it's really something they can't control. They have a genetic predisposition to anxiety or depression. They have some type of objective chemical imbalance. It's not anything to do with their mentality, their attitude being weak or strong. It is pure science and objective. So there should not be a stigma around things that are, so clear to measure and such, clear facts. So I try to emphasize that, but after I do, we can move on to now the rules and
Oh,
regulations.
really quickly, I really resonated with something Jason just said, which was, um, your problems, regardless of how severe they are, they don't define who you are, right? And that kind of goes to Ben's point about how, it's all ultimately a lot of it, or indeed most of it is comes from some objective standpoint, right? Mental health is a science just like any other. And I think people often, going along with the idea of being judged, people will generally feel like, they're intimately associated with their problems, or that their problems define them. And I don't think that applies at all, right? And, part of breaking the stigma is dismantling that idea of, you are your problems, right? Because you are so much more than that. And any given person will be so much more than what they're dealing with.
Hmm. And I feel like a lot of people think therapy when you go, it's kind of just it's scary. They're like trying to diagnose you with all these different tactics. But from what I've heard, I feel like it's kind of just a casual conversation, really. And it's however you can present your problems in a way that will help you. It's not rushed. And, Jason, do you feel like usually with people you've helped out, is it more casual conversation, like something like that, or?
So that brings in when we start talking about what does therapy look like, and that can really be very different depending on the background of your therapist, right? So we have what we call theoretical orientations in counseling, and those are based off of some of the famous, therapists that are out there. So I mentioned Northwestern before. Northwestern is a psychodynamic program. So they train all their therapists to be more psychodynamic, which is meaning that they will go into your past, right? They believe that the struggles you're having right now today can be found in something that's happened in your past, whether it be trauma, experiences, connection, family of origin, all of those things kind of create who you are today. So they go back to try to identify some of that and try to work on things from the past. Solution focused therapists are going to be more of quicker, right? They're going to be like, what are you experiencing now? Stress and anxiety. Here are some techniques to reduce, stress and anxiety. So it's more of like a triage, right? So very quickly giving you tools and techniques that you can use to be able to start to get a handle on it, but it doesn't go back to the root cause, right? Kind of behavioral health also has like the workbooks and things like that as well. So one of the big things when you're looking at going to a therapist is kind of asking, what is your theoretical orientation? How do you operate? And then start to think to yourself, like, what has worked well for you, right? Talking it out, narrative therapy, right? So being able to discuss it and talk through things. Is that helpful? Is having tangible things, lists, journaling, all these things can kind of play into how that session is going to work and how it's going to look and how you're going to respond to it in a good or bad way.
Do you see any patterns, like certain types of people maybe appeal to certain types of therapy, like this type of person maybe more appeal to talk therapy, or this type of person maybe appeal to, therapy that goes into your past?
It really depends on the triggering event potentially that they're coming in for. I've seen where sometimes they need that triage, they need the solution focus to kind of get a handle on things in the immediately, but they're not going to go away until you start to address some of the things from your past. And so it might be a combination of therapies that might be used. And if you have trauma, EMDR is an amazing trauma related, therapy that deals with eye movement, and especially trained therapists that can work absolutely wonders. And when I mean, um, if you have trauma in your past, it can be a variety of things. When we start talking about post-traumatic stress, originally it was thought of that it was just people that were part of the military, right? Coming out of the military that experienced it. But anyone can experience it at any time, within their family of origin or just day-to-day life.
Yeah, great. So, I guess kind of adding on to like how does therapy work? Um, the frequency, is it usually like as needed basis, or is it usually like, a set time during your schedule?
So again, it depends on what you're going through at the time. You can set it up to be once a month, once a week. If you're really in a, kind of struggling or going through something that's pretty tough, you can even do twice a week therapy if you want, and then for a short period of time. And then if you start to kind of come out of what you're currently working on, you might go to once a week to a maintenance plan where you see your therapist once every 2 months, but then all of a sudden the holidays come up, right? Or, finals are coming up and you need some additional support. You can ramp up the sessions then after that. So you yourself can have a say in that. Your therapist can have a say in that. One of the big hurdles sometimes that comes into play is like if you're doing insurance, sometimes insurances will only allow so many visits per year. But then you can always pay out of pocket, so there's a lot of different variations that you can use in order to receive the care that you want.
Right, that's very good Very good explanation. Thank you for that. Also, going along with the idea of how does therapy work, um, if I'm taking a therapy, if I have therapy sessions organized, what else do I have to do outside of that in order to, accompany, the goals of the session and the goals of the session, or, just outside of therapy in general?
That's an amazing question. I love that question because the idea that you're going to be, and I'm doing air quotes, right, for the listeners, fixed within your 50-minute session with the therapist isn't going to be true. It's the therapist is there to help guide you through your journey, and it is a journey. And so it starts before you get to the counseling office, and it continues after you leave the counseling office. And while you're in the counseling office, in the therapist's office, they're equipping you with the tools and techniques in order to be used outside of that space to become successful in overcoming the hurdles that you may be experiencing. And they could be anything from, like I said, journaling, some relaxation techniques, coloring, you name it. There's a bunch of different things that might work specifically for you, but you have to use them and practice them, especially like when you're not, so let's say stress and anxiety, right? Finals, things, school stressors, you have to work on those techniques when you're not stressed, which sounds counterproductive, right? It's like, why would I do the breathing? Why would I, do the relaxation techniques? I'm not stressed right now because you're building that muscle memory, right? You're building that resilience within you that will kick in when you are at a high level of stress and anxiety, or that you do need to have those in place. It's not going to be like, okay, how do I do that again? It's going to be an automatic thing. And so there's work to be done outside of therapy, and certain techniques actually give you homework to do, and then other techniques will just show you techniques and procedures to use at the time.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience with that personally. I've been to therapists, and honestly, I have not always been the best about doing, some of the, out of session stuff. And I think obviously that has had a negative effect on me because it works. There's a reason there's a reason that they ask you to do it. And an analogy I think is good is like with golf. Golf is a very hard game to pick up, and I definitely had a hard time picking it up, but if I were to just pick up a golf club and watch a video on YouTube about how to swing and then show up and expect to shoot par, it's not going to happen. You have to watch the video and go to the driving range and work on it. And the same is with therapy and trying to get your mind better. And one could argue that it's even harder. So it's very important to do those things.
It is, and when I talk with my counseling students, right, the individuals that are becoming counselors, I use the analogy of, as a therapist, we're planting seeds.
Hmm.
So we're planting the seeds of ideas and techniques of how the individual can improve their life. And as the therapist, you may not see those seeds sprout, right? It might be something that was a seed that was planted for you, and therapy might not, you know, emerge and grow until you're in college, or later on, or some other time event. But it's equipping you, the individual, the client, with the tools now, and then it's up to you to cultivate that, right? It's like learning your swing, right? Knowing what you're not going to go out to the tee box and pull out your putter, right, or your sand wedge. Just the knowledge of what tool to pull out at the right time becomes really, really important.
Hmm. For sure. And I kind of feel like, just adding on to everything that you guys have been saying, right? Like, um, the people who show up, I'm assuming that it's not always people who are like in really severe mental conditions, right? Like, you're working on problems, but you can also just be trying to improve your life, and you're not really struggling with anything at the moment. And kind of to add another analogy that I just thought of, it's kind of like, strength and conditioning coaches. Like, you see these NFL players who are like really strong and best shape of their lives, but they still have coaches because, maybe some of them can work out alone and they know all these exercises and how to do it the best they can. But maybe some who have been going to coaches their entire life, they might still need those coaches when they make it to the NFL. So I feel like definitely, like, you don't have to be in like a certain, like, really bad crisis. You can just go there because it just helps you work through your problems. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually better to go before the problem gets
Hmm.
to that level, right? To again establish that pattern and that understanding before you even get to crisis mode.
Yeah, and obviously you can do these practice methods that therapists, give you, outside of therapy. If you for some reason can't go, and like Ethan said with the metaphor for football, I mean, we're talking about mental health, and we're as you know, we're from Chicago and we're Bears fans, so we're talking about Bears fans and football kind of worsens our mental health. So we might want to go about, other ways of talking about mental health. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Uh-huh. Moving on
Well,
to
but
kind of,
I like the
oh yeah.
comparison that everyone is coming, with your physical health
Hmm.
and training, and mental health. It is one, very, very similar and goes along the same line. Each one needs that work, right? Each one needs that repetitive assistance, and whether it's doing something physically or athletically, or even, playing chess or game, whatever. I mean, everything takes that repetitive skill set and work in order to improve it.
Yeah, and I feel like some people are better at kind of holding in their problems and kind of working through it themselves. But like me, for example, like I need to, explain my problems. I talk to my mom all the time and tell her what I'm going through, and that kind of helps me work through different challenges. So I feel like it also kind of depends on the person. Um, but I feel like everyone, right, holding in trauma or certain things that you just want to work on, no matter who you are. I think talking to a therapist helps, even if you think you can get through it alone. That might not always be the case. But moving into our next point. So we've been talking a lot about therapy, but I guess our next question for you, Jason, is besides therapy, when it comes to getting help or asking for help or taking initiative in terms of your mental health and certain challenges, are there any alternatives to that?
Right now, there's so many different resources that you can access. At school, you have a school counselor,
Mhm.
right? You can access your school counselor, that can give you resources and can start pointing you in the right direction. There's a ton of new apps out there. Some are free, some you have to pay for. Better Health, and even some of the online, therapy sessions, so much more accessible. And the nice thing is the American Counseling Association finally got, it's called the Interstate Compact, in place. And what that does, it allows counselors to start to see clients across state lines, which starts to hopefully will lessen the time it takes to get in to see a therapist, and open up a little bit different options for you to do that. So to really, start to have those conversations, right, with your parents, if you feel comfortable, your, siblings, your tribe, of friends, anyone around you, start having those conversations, so that you know how you're doing, what you're dealing with, and then surprisingly, you might find out you're not the only one, right? That a couple other people in your group have struggled, and that's, it can start sharing resources that worked for them, and can even maybe, say, I've seen this therapist, they're really good, and so again, just having that open conversation can start bringing resources to you.
So, one question I think that what you just said reminded me of is, a lot of people, they're reluctant to go to therapy, right? And one of those reasons for not wanting to go is, oh, why can't I just discuss this with my family and they'll help me? Like, so I was wondering, like, what are the particular qualifications or benefits of, seeing a trained professional as opposed to just seeking counsel within your own family or friend group?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's great to have a different perspective, right? Your therapist is not part of your family. They're not experiencing the same things. Um, they're going to have more patience to listen to you sometimes. I know with my own kids, even though I'm trained to listen and to be a therapist, if they come to me and with something, I'm like, oh, come on, we've already talked about this 5 times. It's time for you to do something about it. Whereas in session, it's like, that's really been a struggle for you for a while, a long time. And let's look at how we can, you know, move past this, or what steps we need to take. And so there is a different approach with the training, but also with that family and shared experience as well. And sometimes some of the issues are within the family of origin, right? And so either your immediate family might not see them as such an issue, or they might be experiencing them differently than you. So you look at birth order, you look at, experiences like that. you experience life differently depending on where you're at in your family as well.
And I feel like kind of adding on to that, I feel like there's definitely a stigma amongst parents that sometimes when their kids present certain mental health struggles that they feel like they've kind of failed their kids if they can't figure it out for them. But I kind of just want to give another example. Like some parents are good at certain things, like
Mhm.
maybe teaching their kids how to, lift weights, build stuff, whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean you've let down your kids because you might have the skills, you might not, and that applies to really everything. So I feel like in terms of stigma too, it's important to think about it that way.
Well, and to be transparent, right? So breaking stigma too, like myself and my wife, we have 4 kids amongst us. We have a blended family. We've both trained therapists, in different areas. And all of our kids have seen therapists, not just us, because they need a safe place to go to basically have that conversation and to work through things that they're going through without the parent involvement as well.
Yeah, and I think that point really emphasizes how much the environment a therapist creates matters because you are a trained mental health professional, but obviously I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I assume that if you were to act as a therapist to your kid, it would kind of take away some of the benefits, as opposed to your kid or one of us going to a therapist and talking one-on-one in a more objective, in a more objective manner. And I think that connects to, the main point of therapy training is to create a warm environment, just like you said, where there's no judgment, there's no other connections to things going on. Like a parent might judge you and say, "Well, you did this and this," and they know more about you. So I think that really emphasizes how beneficial the environment, just the environment, and take away the
Mhm.
training of going to therapy can be.
And therapists are trained to create it's called positive conditional, unconditional regard, in that environment. And that's what is being put into play with the clientele that comes in. And I also like to think of it like this: is that my oldest was playing softball, and my cousin also had a daughter who was playing softball at the same time. And I would try to tell my daughter how to do something, stand a certain way or do something, and got a dirty look and was told to be quiet, right? My cousin's daughter did the same thing to her. So then we decided, well, let's tell each other's daughters, coming from someone else, a neutral party, also, and then they listen, right? And sometimes family can be too close to really for us to take their word for it or to really hear them at times, but to have that neutral person come in can be very, very helpful.
For sure. And that's kind of funny because I play baseball, well, my brother plays baseball, and my dad, he when we struggled, he tried helping us with our form and everything. I've seen other dads try to like yell at their kids from the stands. But it's like I go to baseball lessons, hitting lessons, because I can't take advice from my dad the same way I take it from someone else. And I think that's definitely a great example for that. Um, One more thing that I feel like we kind of want to get to is in terms of therapy and going to talk to a therapist and everything, why is it important to address those mental health challenges? Like, what are the impacts or effects on your physical and mental health if you don't get those addressed?
So it can compound into more serious issues. So if you're, having stress and anxiety, it might, grow into, something that maybe keeps you from doing and living your life, which then becomes a disorder. So that's kind of like the big change there. We also have started seeing where if you're not taking care of your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health starts to decline as well. And so you want to make sure that you're taking care of all that as a holistic approach in a lot of ways. And so you want to make sure that you're addressing it head on before it becomes a bigger issue. And unfortunately, depending on what exactly the struggle is, you also see where an individual might start to self-medicate, right, to feel better. So they might start to use substances, alcohol, marijuana, different things to try to stabilize themselves, try to make themselves feel better. And that becomes really complicated then because we look at a dual diagnosis possibly then of an addiction and whatever was triggering that use of substance. And so, yes, it feels better to be on the substance, but it doesn't fix what's going on, within your life. And so that, again, just a snowball effect where it can start to get worse as it goes on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as we wrap up this episode, I want to talk about the big picture of going to therapy. Obviously going to therapy takes, courage, and you're not only helping yourself, but you're also helping the people you love and the people you count on. So if you're a parent and you struggle with traumas as a child, it's important to get help, whether it be through therapy or not, so you don't pour those traumas into your kids and the kids don't experience trauma themselves. So obviously, we want to talk about the big picture and how it takes courage to go get help and how much it can be of and how much of a benefit you can reap from going to therapy. So Kabir and Ethan and Jason, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think for the big picture for this episode and therapy is the idea of like challenges in life. A good example is like video games. If the entire video game was easy, you never had any challenges. Once you got to the end and you completed it, would you feel satisfied? Would you be fulfilled in how you approached, playing the game? And I think in real life, right, like having certain challenges and getting over them, it makes success even sweeter. And it's part of your journey, no matter if there's really high highs or really low lows. It's all part of it. And, once you come out on the other side, that just adds to your story and gives you more things to just be proud of. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, those were great points. And I just wanted to return to the idea of, stigma and judgment, right? So, in terms of the big picture, many of us fear getting judged for, seeking help or seeking counselors, right? But ultimately, it's your life. You know, your problems are, not the concern of other people. And, regardless of how they react to your seeking help, um, it's always important to prioritize your own health before, catering to others' tastes, right? So even if they have negative things to say about, therapy as a concept or even mental health, your mental seeking help for mental health issues, you know, the important thing to remember is that your problems can be solved if you take the initiative and you don't have to listen to people who are just, constantly reinforcing social stigma.
There's so many great points you just made there that I just absolutely love. Like you can't help others, if you're not good. And like that's the analogy on the airplane, right? Put your oxygen mask on first before helping others because you can't help anybody else if you're passed out, right? And so you want to make sure that you're doing well enough to help other people that are around you, which is awesome.
Yeah,
And
oh, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Oh, and you're role models. Yeah, every single one of us is a role model. Even if you don't think of yourself as a role model, um, you are. People younger and around you are noticing you. They're looking at you. They're hearing what you have to say. And when I was in the school districts, we talked about bystanders, right? Bystanders are there looking and watching, and bystanders are the most powerful force in any environment because there's so many of them, and they choose what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And so, standing up and having these conversations and having this amazing podcast, to try to break down and have real conversations is so important, and it starts to change the climate, which is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just adding on to that, like if you're struggling to, get up, go to therapy, find help because you've given up, kind of like what Jason said, think of yourself being a role model to other people. Maybe it's your kids, your friends, do it for them if you can't do it for yourself and try to set a good example of what it means to overcome challenges and to seek help.
Yeah, when we're talking about the big picture, it reminds me of a previous episode about the pursuit of happiness. And one of the main ideas we talked about is that happiness is really all there is. You can be a billionaire and be the most unhappy person in the world.
Mhm.
You know, I've met people who are actually very well off, and to me they don't seem very happy. And I've met people who are not as well off, and they seem so fulfilled and so happy. That's really all there is. So going going and taking that next step to get therapy is going to improve your life because these people are trained. These people are not there to judge you. These people are there to create a good environment. And you don't have to say to anybody if you're worried about stigma that you went to therapy, and you can practice these things on your own. So it definitely connects to the pursuit of happiness and can definitely help you. And you should not feel bad about going to therapy at all. They're there for a reason.
What you're just saying there is I just had this conversation yesterday with an individual, who was well off and was kind of saying like, oh, I shouldn't be complaining. I've got, life is good and everything like that. I'm like, life is good and you can have everything that you ever want. Doesn't mean that you can't have struggles too. Like having wealth, having, a good family, having everything, a lot of positives doesn't mean that you're immune to having struggles, at different times. And that everyone goes through different things. And so the fact that therapy is open for everybody and it can be very, very helpful. You're talking about like the big picture, something in therapy that we have. One of the techniques is called the magic wand. And it's if you had a magic wand, like I handed you a magic wand and you were to wave it right now, and your life would be exactly the way you want it. What changes, and why are those changes in your life get you where you want to go? And then once you identify those, you can start to address those one by one and to get to the life that you want.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So I think, the big picture kind of wraps up our episode today. Um, in terms of like where if you're listening for the first time, Ben, Kabir, do you guys want to talk about where they can check our socials and everything?
Yeah, definitely. Um, So all of our socials, Spotify, iTunes, Twitter, Facebook, they're all on our website, www.mindmatterspodcast.net. No caps. And you can access all of our social medias from there. We try and put out content. We're going to put out snippets of these episodes to try and spread the message as much as possible because the most important thing we do here, the most important thing today and all of our future episodes will be breaking the stigma. We're not gonna, in a 40-minute episode, fix someone's life, like you said, get them to wave that magic wand and everything's perfect. It's just not gonna happen. But having these conversations will allow more people to get help. So by going to our website, by checking out our social media, you don't have to, like, share, do all these things. Just listen and try and, understand what we're saying because it truly makes a difference and you can make a difference if you listen.
For sure.
Being part of the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And then, Jason, if you're comfortable, is there any way that someone can get in touch with you or just learn more about what you do?
Or, follow
Yeah,
any of your socials. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. You can go definitely reach out, email me, Jason at joyce-martyr.com. We also have a website, joycemartyr.com, where you can find a bunch of information on there as well. And definitely, yeah, reach out, if you have any questions, comments, or need any resources as well. I'd be happy to help out.
great. Well, I think that's all for today. My name's Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and just remember, your mind matters.